I never imagined my marriage would come to this. My wife, Jenny, and I had been together for 6 years, married for 5. We were the kind of couple that people always said looked perfect together. But something changed a few months ago, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was drifting away from me. I just didn't know why. It all started when Jenny started going to a new gym. She had been on a health kick, trying to get back in shape, and I was supportive, at least at first. She joined this high-end fitness center in town, one that I knew attracted a certain crowd: athletes, celebrities, and people who like to show off their wealth. It seemed out of character for her, but she assured me it was just about the workouts. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was happy that she found something she was passionate about, especially since the last couple of years had been hard on her. But I started to notice subtle changes. She was coming home later and later from the gym, saying she stayed behind for an extra class or to chat with some friends she made there. Her phone would buzz late at night, and she'd always be quick to grab it and smile at the screen. I told myself I was overreacting, but there was a knot in my stomach that kept tightening. Then, there were the clothes. She started buying expensive, tight-fitting outfits for the gym. Nothing like the usual t-shirts and leggings she used to wear. When I asked her about it, she shrugged it off, saying she just wanted to feel good about herself. Again, it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the kind of thing she used to care about. One evening, when she came back late again, I caught a whiff of cologne on her. Definitely not mine. I didn't say anything that night, but that was when I decided to start paying closer attention. A couple of days later, she accidentally left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I felt horrible snooping, but I had to know what was going on. I opened her messages, and there it was, a text conversation with someone named D. There was nothing explicit, but they were talking about meeting up at the gym and how much fun they had the other night. My stomach dropped. I wanted to confront her right away, but I didn't. Instead, I went to that gym the next day to see for myself. I asked the staff if they knew who D was, describing him as one of her friends she mentioned. The guy at the front desk smirked a little, as if he knew more than he let on, and pointed towards the basketball court. That's when I saw him. Darius. He was in his early 30s, tall, muscular, and confident. He was everything I wasn't. As I watched him play, I noticed the way he interacted with the other people around him, especially the women. He had this charisma, this effortless charm, and it was easy to see why Jenny might be drawn to him. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. For a week, I wrestled with what to do. I kept telling myself that it didn't mean anything, that I was jumping to conclusions. But then one night, I followed her. She had told me she was going to a yoga class, but instead I saw her walking into a cafe with Darius. They sat close together, laughing and talking in a way I hadn't seen her do with me in a long time. I felt sick watching them. My heart was pounding in my ears as I walked away, not wanting to see anymore. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if I had done something wrong, if I had pushed her away somehow. The next morning, when she came back from her yoga class, I told her we needed to talk. At first, she denied it, said they were just friends, that I was being paranoid. But when I mentioned the messages and that I had seen them together, her face changed. She admitted they had been spending a lot of time together, that she had grown close to him. She didn't say the word affair, but I didn't need her to. I could see the guilt in her eyes. I didn't yell or scream, I just felt numb. I asked her why, and she said she didn't know. Something about feeling alive again, like she had when we first met. She said it wasn't serious, that it hadn't gone too far yet. But I knew that wasn't the point. The point was that she had gone there at all. Now, I'm left wondering where we go from here. I love her, and I believe she still loves me, but this has changed everything. The trust is broken, and I don't know if it can be fixed. I'm scared of what happens next, of what it means if we can't work through this. All I know is that nothing will ever be the same again. After our talk, things went back to a strange kind of normal. Jenny assured me she had ended things with Darius, swearing it had never gone beyond a few emotional moments. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Every time I looked at her, I was haunted by the memory of that night at the cafe, the way she had looked at him. It was a look I hadn't seen from her in years. Even though she promised to make things right, I couldn't stop the doubts from creeping in. They gnawed at me, feeding my worst fears, and I began to question everything about our life together. The breaking point came about a month later, during what should have been a normal Sunday afternoon. Our daughter Emily was playing in the living room, and I was picking up her toys when I heard Jenny on the phone in the next room. She was talking quietly, her voice hushed, and even though I couldn't make out the words, the tone was unmistakable. It was that same soft, intimate tone I had heard her use with Darius at the cafe. My heart started pounding, and the familiar wave of dread washed over me. Was she still talking to him? Was this thing between them really over? I walked into the room and she quickly hung up the phone. When I asked who she was talking to, she hesitated before saying it was just her mom. But something in her expression didn't sit right with me. It was like she was hiding something. Later that night, I lay awake next to her, staring at the ceiling, unable to quiet the voice in my head. I thought about all the little things I'd ignored over the years, subtle changes in her behavior, Emily's features that sometimes didn't seem quite like mine. It was probably nothing, I told myself. But what if it wasn't? The thought lingered for days until I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, I found myself ordering a DNA test kit online. I felt sick as I clicked the purchase button, like I was betraying my daughter by even thinking such a thing. But I had to know. I needed to put this doubt to rest, one way or another. When the kit arrived, I waited for the right moment. Jenny was out running errands, and I took the opportunity to collect a swab from Emily while we were brushing her teeth. She giggled as I carefully swiped the inside of her cheek, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I felt a pang of guilt, but I told myself that I was doing this for her too. If there was any truth to my fears, I had to know. We both did. The waiting period for the results was pure agony. I went about my days like a robot, going through the motions at work, coming home and playing the role of a doting husband and father. But in my mind, I was already preparing myself for the worst. I tried not to let Jenny see the anxiety in my eyes, though I could tell she noticed something was off. She asked if I was okay, and I always said the same thing. Just stressed from work. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the real reason. When the email finally arrived, I stared at my phone for a good 5 minutes before opening it. My hands were shaking as I clicked on the message. There it was, right at the top, in cold, clinical language. The probability of paternity was 0%. My whole world seemed to collapse in that instant. I could barely breathe, the words blurring together on the screen as the reality of what I was reading sank in. Emily wasn't mine. My little girl, the one I had raised and loved for the last 4 years, wasn't my biological daughter. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, grief, betrayal, all of it swirled together, making me feel like I was drowning. I stumbled into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm the panic rising inside me. But there was no escaping it. The truth was out, and now I had to decide what to do with it. I spent the next few days in a daze, avoiding Jenny as much as I could. She noticed, of course, and kept asking me what was wrong, why I was being distant. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, but another part of me hesitated. I was scared of what she might say, scared of losing the only life I had known for so many years. Eventually, though, I couldn't hold it in any longer. One night after Emily had gone to bed, I sat down across from Jenny in the living room. My voice trembled as I spoke. I did something, I said. Something I'm not proud of. She looked at me, her eyes widening with concern. What are you talking about? I ordered a DNA test for Emily, I confessed, the words catching in my throat. And the results came back. She's not mine. For a moment, Jenny just stared at me, her face pale. Then she covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Is Darius her father? I asked, my voice breaking. Is that why you've been acting so strange? Why you got so close to him? Jenny shook her head frantically. No, it's not like that, she said. But there was something in her voice that didn't sound convincing. It happened before. It was a mistake, I swear. Before I could respond, she was sobbing, burying her face in her hands. I felt a mix of anger and pity, watching the woman I had loved for so long fall apart in front of me. The truth was out now, but it didn't bring the relief I thought it would. If anything, it left me with even more questions. I didn't know how to move forward from here, whether our marriage could survive this betrayal. All I knew was that I couldn't look at her the same way again. And as for Emily, I wasn't sure what this meant for us. She was still my daughter in every way that mattered, but knowing the truth had changed something deep inside me, something that might never be fixed. After that night, things were never the same. Jenny and I were like strangers living under the same roof. I went through the motions for Emily's sake, but there was a distance between us that we couldn't bridge. I kept replaying the last few years in my head, wondering if I'd missed signs that could have prepared me for this. I felt like I didn't know the woman I'd married at all. The weeks dragged on, and we avoided talking about that night as if ignoring it could somehow make it go away. But then, something else happened. Something that shattered whatever fragile piece we had managed to hold on to. Jenny came into the kitchen one morning looking nervous. Her face was pale, and she was holding a small white stick in her hand. I didn't even need to ask what it was. "I'm pregnant," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I took a test last night, and a second one this morning, just to be sure." I stared at her, my mind reeling. Pregnant? How could this be happening now of all times? "Are you sure?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. The look on her face said it all. She nodded, biting her lip as she reached for my hand. "I don't know how this happened, but I swear, you're the father." I pulled my hand away, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. "You expect me to believe that after everything?" I said, my anger finally boiling over. "I just found out Emily isn't even mine, and now you're telling me this? How am I supposed to trust anything you say?" Jenny's eyes filled with tears. "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice breaking, "but this is different. I haven't seen Darius since I ended things. I swear I've been faithful to you. This baby is yours." Her words sounded desperate, but I couldn't just take them at face value, not after everything that had happened. "I want a paternity test," I said coldly, "as soon as it's possible. If you're telling the truth, you shouldn't have a problem with that." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand," she whispered. "If that's what it takes for you to believe me, then we'll do it." The next few months were some of the hardest of my life. Jenny tried to pretend things were normal, that we were just a couple expecting their second child, but I couldn't. I kept my distance, sleeping in the guest room and throwing myself into work to avoid facing the reality of our situation. The thought of another paternity test hung over me like a dark cloud, and the idea of going through that agony again made it hard to even look at her. As her belly grew, she kept trying to get me involved in the pregnancy. She'd bring home ultrasound pictures and try to get me to come to doctor's appointments, but I kept making excuses. I could see how much it hurt her, but I couldn't pretend like everything was okay. One day, after I'd rejected yet another invitation to a prenatal checkup, Jenny broke down. "You're punishing me," she sobbed, standing in the hallway with her hands on her swollen belly. "I know I made mistakes, but this isn't fair. You're shutting me out when I need you the most. I can't do this alone." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't that I didn't care about the baby. I wanted to be there, to be excited like I was when we were expecting Emily. But every time I saw her, I was reminded of the betrayal, and I didn't know how to let it go. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said quietly. I don't know how to deal with any of this. You have no idea what it's like to find out the child you've been raising for 4 years isn't yours." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "And you have no idea what it's like to live with the guilt of what I did," she said. "I'm not proud of it, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But this baby is a chance for us to fix things." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But I just couldn't. Not until I knew for sure. When the time came for the prenatal paternity test, I went with her to the clinic. We barely spoke on the drive there, the tension thick in the air. They took the samples, and then we were left to wait again. It was like living through the nightmare all over. Only this time, I wasn't just questioning the future of our marriage. I was questioning whether I could ever see myself raising another child under these circumstances. The results came back a week later. I stared at the email in my inbox, my hands trembling as I opened it. I felt a mix of relief and despair as I read the words. The probability of paternity was over 99%. The baby was mine. I went to find Jenny, who was sitting in the living room, nervously picking at the threads of the couch cushion. When I told her the results, she burst into tears of relief, throwing her arms around me. "I told you," she cried. "I told you it was yours." I hugged her back, but I didn't feel the same relief. Instead, there was a heavy emptiness inside me. The paternity test had confirmed what she had said, but it didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't take away the doubts that still haunted me every time I looked at her. As the due date approached, I tried to be more supportive, attending birthing classes and helping to prepare the nursery. But it felt like I was just going through the motions. Even though I knew the baby was mine, I couldn't shake the feeling that the foundation of our marriage had cracked beyond repair. The day our son was born was bittersweet. I held him in my arms and felt an overwhelming love for this tiny, helpless child. But when I looked at Jenny, exhausted but glowing with happiness, I realized that I still felt like a stranger to her. I had been there for the birth. I would be there as a father, but as a husband, I wasn't so sure. Bringing our son home didn't magically fix things between us. If anything, it made the rift even more apparent. I was determined to be the best father I could be, to love my son and be present for him. But I didn't know if I could ever rebuild what Jenny and I once had. The trust that was shattered by the betrayal and the uncertainty of the past year wasn't something that could be easily mended. We were a family, but it didn't feel whole. I was there in body, but my heart was still in pieces, and I didn't know if they could ever be put back together. The months after our son's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and tense silences. I was trying to be a good father, but the strain between Jenny and me had only grown worse. It felt like there was always something left unsaid between us, a heaviness hanging in the air that never lifted, even during what should have been happy moments. At first, I thought it was just the aftermath of everything we'd been through. The affair, the DNA test with Emily, the months of uncertainty during the pregnancy. But then, one night while I was feeding our son, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. He was almost 3 months old, and as I studied his tiny face, I saw something unmistakable. The curve of his nose, the shape of his jawline. They didn't look like mine. In fact, they didn't look like anyone in my family. Suddenly, a terrifying possibility crept back into my mind. What if the paternity test had been wrong? Or worse, what if Jenny had lied about cutting things off with Darius? I had tried to bury my suspicions when the first test confirmed the baby was mine. But now that I saw the resemblance to someone else, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know for sure. The next day, I ordered another paternity test. This time, I didn't tell Jenny. I felt a sickening sense of déjà vu as I collected a sample from our son and sent it off to the lab, but I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I couldn't live in this uncertainty anymore. When the results came back, it felt like my worst nightmare had come true all over again. The probability of paternity was 0%. I stared at the words, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I had believed Jenny when she said the baby was mine. I had tried to make things work, to rebuild our family. And now, it was all unraveling before my eyes. I confronted her that same night. I waited until Emily was asleep and our son was down for the night before I walked into the living room, where Jenny was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in, her expression shifting from casual to concerned when she saw the look on my face. "I did another paternity test," I said flatly. This time, it came back negative. "He's not mine, Jenny." Her face went pale, and she looked like she might faint. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible. I swear I haven't seen Darius. I don't know how—" "Stop lying," I snapped, my voice cracking with anger. "You told me it was over, that I was the father, but it was all a lie, wasn't it? You've been lying to me this whole time." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "I thought he was yours," she sobbed. "I really did. I haven't seen Darius since before I found out I was pregnant. I thought it was over with him." "But you knew there was a chance," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You knew there was a possibility that this wasn't my child, and you kept it from me anyway. How could you do that, Jenny? After everything, how could you keep lying?" "I was scared," she cried, her voice barely a whisper. "I was scared of losing you, of losing our family. I thought if I just believed hard enough, it would be true. I thought it would all work out. But it didn't, and now—" She broke down, covering her face with her hands. I didn't know what to say. I stood there feeling like my whole world had been torn apart for the second time. It was like a cruel joke, and I was the punchline. Emily wasn't mine, and now neither was our son. I had spent months loving and caring for a child that wasn't even mine, while the woman I had trusted more than anyone had been lying to me. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever thought possible. I felt sick, like I had swallowed broken glass. The woman I had built my life with, the mother of the children I had thought were mine, had taken away everything I believed in. I thought about leaving right then and there, just walking out and never looking back. But the truth was, I was still attached to that little boy, even if he wasn't biologically mine. I couldn't just switch off my feelings for him. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can stay. But I'm not going to abandon him or Emily. They're innocent in all of this." Jenny nodded, her eyes red and swollen. "I understand," she said, her voice cracking. "I'll do whatever you need me to do. I'll tell you everything. I'll be honest from now on. I don't want to lose you." I couldn't even look at her. "It's too late for that," I said. "You've already lost me." The next few weeks were some of the darkest of my life. I moved into the guest room permanently and told Jenny I needed space to figure things out. We agreed to tell the kids nothing for now. Emily was too young to understand, and our son, well, he was just a baby. I tried to keep up the appearance of being a family man, but inside, I was shattered. I felt like I was living a lie. Jenny kept trying to make things right, doing whatever she could to show me she was sorry. But it didn't matter anymore. I had given her my trust, and she had shattered it beyond repair. I didn't know if I could ever look at her without feeling that cold emptiness again. One night, after another long, sleepless stretch, I found myself staring at the sleeping faces of the two children I had thought were mine. I realized I had a choice to make. I could stay, pretending for the sake of appearances, or I could walk away and start over. No matter what I decided, I knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. After the truth came out about our son, my life felt like it was on autopilot. Each day blurred into the next as I went through the motions. I still took care of Emily and the baby, but it was different now. I was detached, doing what needed to be done out of obligation rather than love. It wasn't their fault, I kept reminding myself that. But the weight of everything hung over me, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had turned my life upside down. Jenny was trying, I'll give her that. She kept apologizing, kept trying to have those heart-to-heart talks I just couldn't handle. I'd catch her crying when she thought I wasn't looking, but I didn't know how to comfort her. I didn't know if I even wanted to. She had broken something inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I spent more time at work, taking on extra projects just to be out of the house. The nights when I was home, I'd come back late and collapse on the couch or stay in the guest room with the door locked. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was just about the kids or mundane household stuff, never about the elephant in the room. A few weeks went by like this, and then one evening, Jenny cornered me in the kitchen. I had just walked in after another long day at work. I was exhausted and in no mood for a conversation, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't going to let it go this time. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," she said, her voice strained, "but we need to figure out what's next for the kids' sake. We can't keep living like this." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "What do you want me to say, Jenny? You want me to just forget everything that happened? Pretend like you didn't lie to me for years?" She flinched but didn't back down. "I don't expect you to forgive me, not now. Maybe not ever. But we owe it to the kids to make some kind of decision. If you can't stay, then..." Then I understand. But if you want to work on this, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Her words hit me hard. I had been avoiding making any real decision for weeks, afraid of what it would mean no matter which way I chose. Leaving would mean breaking up the only family Emily and the baby had ever known. Staying meant living in a marriage where trust had been obliterated. I leaned against the kitchen counter, feeling the weight of the situation crush down on me. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Jenny, I said quietly. Every time I look at you, all I can think about is the lies. How am I supposed to get past that? Her eyes welled up with tears again. I know I've destroyed everything, she whispered, but I'm begging you to at least try. For the kids. For us. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but I just didn't know if I had it in me. I was a wreck, and I knew I was barely holding things together for the kids as it was. Part of me felt like the only way to truly heal was to leave and start over somewhere else. But then I thought about Emily, about how much she loved me, how she saw me as her daddy, even if we didn't share the same blood. Could I really walk away from her? Could I live with myself if I did? I stayed silent for a long time, and eventually, Jenny seemed to take that as my answer. She turned and left the kitchen, retreating to the bedroom. I could hear her sobbing through the closed door, but I didn't go to her. I just stood there, feeling lost. The days passed, and I still couldn't bring myself to make a decision. I talked to a lawyer just to understand my options, but every scenario felt like a lose-lose situation. One afternoon, as I sat in my car outside the office, I realized I needed to take some time away from everything. I needed to clear my head, figure out what I really wanted. I decided I would go away for a week. I had a buddy who owned a cabin upstate, and I knew he'd let me crash there for a while. I told Jenny that night. I'm leaving for a few days, I said. I need some time to think. She didn't argue or plead with me this time. She just nodded, a resigned look in her eyes. I understand, she whispered. Take as much time as you need. The drive up to the cabin was long and quiet, and the solitude gave me too much time to think. I replayed everything over and over in my head. How we had met, how happy we had once been, and how everything had crumbled. It was hard to reconcile the woman I fell in love with and the person who had deceived me for years. For the first few days, I didn't do much of anything. I sat by the lake, drank too much, and tried not to think about what was waiting for me back home. But eventually, as the days went on, I started to find a bit of clarity. I couldn't change what Jenny had done. That betrayal would always be a part of our story. But I realized that what mattered now was what kind of future I wanted for myself and the kids. On the last night at the cabin, I made a decision. I would go back and try to make things work for the sake of the children. But it wasn't for Jenny. It was for Emily and the baby. I couldn't imagine leaving them, no matter how much pain I felt. If there was any chance to rebuild some semblance of a family, I had to take it, even if it meant doing it with walls still standing between me and the woman I had once loved unconditionally. The drive back home felt different than the one coming up. There was no resolution, no feeling of closure. But at least I had made a decision. When I walked back through the front door, Jenny was waiting for me, her face tense with anticipation. I'm going to stay, I said, meeting her eyes. But not because I've forgiven you. I'm doing this for the kids. If we can find a way to make it work, maybe one day I'll be able to move past what you did, but right now, I'm not there. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. That was the beginning of our new life together. A life built on the wreckage of everything we had once been. I didn't know if we would ever truly be happy again, but for the sake of Emily and the baby, I was willing to try. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the only one I had left. And so, we began the slow, painful process of picking up the pieces, hoping that somehow we could build something new out of the ruins. The decision to stay had felt like the right one for a while. I told myself that I was doing it for Emily and the baby, that I could put my anger aside for the sake of the kids. But, as the months went by, the resentment only grew. Every time I looked at Jenny, I saw a liar. And every time I looked at the kids, I was reminded of everything I had lost. The years spent believing I had a perfect family. The unconditional trust I once had in my wife. Our home was like a ticking time bomb. We went through the motions, played the parts of a happy couple in front of the kids, but it was all a facade. Even though Jenny was always trying to show me that she could be the wife I had once loved, it didn't matter anymore. The damage was too deep, and no amount of effort from her could undo what she had done. The turning point came one night when I had stayed late at work, deliberately dragging my feet to avoid going home. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it was nearly midnight, and the house was dark. As I walked inside, I found Jenny sitting on the couch, waiting for me. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. "Where have you been?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with desperation. "I thought you were coming home hours ago." I dropped my keys on the table and sighed. "I told you I had work. What do you want me to say?" "I want you to be here," she said, her voice trembling. "I want us to try to be a family again. I'm doing everything I can, but you're barely even here. It's like you've already left." That was the moment when something snapped inside me. I felt a cold wave of bitterness wash over me, and I realized that I had been lying to myself just as much as she had lied to me. I wasn't staying for the kids. I wasn't staying because I thought we could make it work. I was staying because I wanted her to suffer. I wanted her to feel the same kind of helplessness and pain that she had put me through. "I already did leave, Jenny," I said coldly. "I left the moment I found out the truth about our son." She recoiled as if I had slapped her. "You said you were doing this for the kids," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "You said you were willing to try." "I lied," I replied, "just like you did." I could see the devastation on her face, but I didn't care anymore. There was no part of me that wanted to fix things. All I wanted was to make her feel as broken as she had made me feel. And that was when I decided on the final act of revenge, the one thing that would hurt her more than anything else. The next day, I set my plan into motion. I started preparing to leave, quietly and deliberately. I began liquidating our joint accounts, moving money into a separate bank account she didn't know about. I sold off some of my personal assets and even took out a loan against my retirement fund. I made sure everything was in order without leaving a trail that Jenny could easily follow. A week later, when Jenny took the kids to visit her parents for the weekend, I made my move. I packed my bags, emptied the safe, and left a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't long, just a few sentences. "Jenny, I'm done. I can't live this lie anymore. I can't pretend that these children are mine, and I can't pretend to love you. I'm leaving and I won't be back. Don't try to find me. I've made sure you won't be able to." When she returned, the house was empty. I had taken all my things, along with every bit of cash and valuables I could carry. I left her nothing but the memories of the life we once had and the cold reality of the betrayal she had tried so hard to bury. In the days that followed, I ignored the dozens of calls and messages from her, each one more desperate than the last. She begged me to come back, pleaded for another chance, even threatened to go to the police, but there was nothing she could do. I had already made sure of that. I changed my number, deleted my social media accounts, and cut ties with everyone who knew us. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my closest friends. I just vanished, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a shattered life that she had created. As for the kids, I know what people will think. That I was cruel, that I was abandoning innocent children who had done nothing wrong. But I had spent too long living a lie, and I couldn't bear to stay in a family that wasn't really mine. I told myself that they would be better off without me, that Jenny could raise them alone. After all, she had lied to me about who they really were. Let her deal with the consequences. In the end, my revenge was complete. I had taken everything from Jenny, her security, her future, and the family she had betrayed me for. I left her with nothing but the weight of her own guilt, a lifetime of wondering what might have been if she had never cheated. I disappeared to a new city, started over with a new identity, and rebuilt my life from scratch. I found work under a different name, rented a small apartment, and kept my distance from anyone who might recognize me. I was a ghost, living a life that felt both free and hollow at the same time. I sometimes wondered what became of Jenny and the kids, whether she managed to pick up the pieces or if she continued to struggle. but I pushed those thoughts away whenever they came. I had made my choice, and there was no turning back. My revenge had cost me my own happiness, but at least I knew that she would live with the consequences of her betrayal for the rest of her life. And that was the only closure I was ever going to get. To